So the next year, what we did is we looked at more timings. We looked at adult peak. There's no larvae out there at this point. We looked at early instars when they're protected in the plant. We looked at late instars when they're popping into the soil at rhododendron full bloom. And what we could see is we did see, because these densities were really high, we saw a nice dose response. This is the current formulation that we see. We saw, a couple of things really stuck out from this trial. The earlier, the better. And this was shocking to me. We don't have any larvae. I've already told you it's a larvicide. And what we see at the adult peak is we were seeing 67 to 100% control. No larvae present. It's not going to stick around. We know that it doesn't have residual activity. At the early instar, it looked great. We saw 76 to 95% control. All of those single applications. It's amazing. Again, I've told you this is a time that our insecticides don't, penetrate through the plant and get those larvae. And the one time that we hypothesized would be the best time to treat them is where we saw the worst control. We saw 0% control at the half rate and a good control at the high rate. So a couple of things stuck out. If I go with a high rate, which is now a gallon per acre, 128 fluid ounces per acre. High rate, adult peak to late larval instar peak was about 3.5 to 4 week. So just a high rate, it was 100 to 90, 95 to 100% control. But there was also a significant trend that the earlier we went, the better it was. So those are really the two bookends right there. That's a long window. That's a very, very long window right there. In 2021, we went back to that same place, and I don't know if it's because we had sprayed Suprado all the way around it or what. The superintendent was well aware of our results. We always tell them what's going on, and they kind of treated it, really ratcheted populations down, much like what we saw in 2023. Very, very light year. So if you applied Suprado last year, I would imagine it worked really well. Most of our insecticides work really low at low densities, and we basically flatlined them in all application timings. However, the late peak was the only one that we saw, the period where we'd suspect that it would do the best. That late timing was the only one that we saw that had any larvae whatsoever. So this is one application on all of these. So just to recap, if we go with a high rate, if we're just looking at high rate at the, at adult peak, with the current formulation, we've never seen any larvae in any of those plots. We looked at the early instars. If we go with a high rate in that early formulation. Hey, tell your mom I'll call her back. Right. Anyway, early instar. I think we can mute it. There we go. Look at that. Early instar, 95 to 100% control with a high rate. With the current formulation. And then when we have larvae entering the soil, the one time that we suspected that it would be most effective, what we see there is, really high control as long as we're going with a high rate. So all of those are single applications. It made no sense to us. I've already set this up that this is a larvicide. It doesn't make any sense why it would work in an adult timing. So what we did is we started popping them open to look at their reproductive systems to see if it was somehow impacting them. They look normal. They have a full complement of eggs in there. So again, real big head scratcher on that one. I mean, what I expected to see is that their female reproductive system would be totally withered. So what we did at this point to try to explain why we see this control in the field when there are no larvae present is we decided to spray adults, and we put them on POA annual plugs, let them lay eggs for 7 days. And then the following week, we heat extract off any of the first instars to get us an idea about what's going on. In that first year, we saw almost complete removal of first instars compared to the untreated control. We got 91 to 98% fewer first instars. When we looked at a different population in the next year, we saw that it was a little bit less than that. In the lower rate, we didn't see any control, but we got about 50% fewer first instars. So it's doing something to the adults. If we're spraying the adults, letting them go, the turf is not treated, we remove them, it's leading to fewer larvae, even though this is a larvicide. So we did the opposite in another trial. We decided to let the adults lay eggs to see if this was possibly ovicidal, remove the adults, spray those eggs, and then check for larvae the following week. And we saw in both years really nice reductions of basically viable eggs. So we got anywhere between 35 and 85% fewer first instars just by treating the eggs. So it's doing a couple of things, but this thing is really excited is that it's ovicidal. We don't have any insecticides that control eggs. We do see this with mites and mite control in the south or in the west on different crops, is that we have some insecticides that will impact eggs. Why it impacts eggs is this thing is made out of the same material as the exoskeleton. The egg is formed with chitin on the outside. So a product that breaks down the synthesis of chitin is going to affect that when it goes to hatch out of that egg. All right, but the other thing that we can see from based on other studies and other agricultural systems is this product, or this active ingredient, I should say, has translaminar activity. So even though that egg is tucked inside the plant, it's nice that it has ovicidal activity, but that egg isn't exposed. But what we see with this active ingredient is will move translaminarly. It will come in contact with that egg. So this also explains why we were able to see some good control at that early instar larval timing as well. That those instars, those larvae initially are boring up and down throughout the plant. They should be protected, but we're also seeing really good control. All right, so the adult effect can be variable. I'm not really super risk averse, but this is one where I tend to kind of want to use it as a larvicide. I kind of want to split the difference. All of our evidence suggests in field trials that earlier is better. We know it does these things to adults. We know it does these things to eggs as well, but really the main effect is in larvae. The other important thing to know is in any of our trials in the lab where we sprayed Suprado against the adults do not die. And we can see this, I found a paper from Australia. I found a paper from Maine, my home state, where potato pests are a problem, and they spray pests, and it shuts down the reproductive systems of these beetles, but the beetles don't die. And so the farmers do not like this because they're seeing beetles all over the place, even though they're not laying viable eggs. So it is something important to note that if you do use it at this timing, and again, I don't think I'm super comfortable using it solely as an adulticide, but if you do use it at this timing, you're probably going to see adults walking on your surfaces, and I know that makes a lot of people nervous.